Today, I will talk about trauma and happiness with Andrea Nakayama, functional medicine nutritionist from Oregon, USA. Hello, Andrea, and very welcome to our Open to Happiness podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicoletta.
Oh, so brilliant to have you here. So, Andrea, where shall we start? Shall we start by finding out a little bit about you? Who are you,
Sure.
and how was your journey in life so far?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So as you said, I'm a functional medicine nutritionist, and this was a later career shift for me over 20 years ago. It really started with a passion for health and nutrition and trying to figure out what was going on with my own body. But that was all happening when my late husband, was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumor in April of 2000, when we were just 7 weeks pregnant with our first and only child. So that experience really catapulted me into a different realm of research around nutrition, and not just about what's going on with me, this little niggling thing that doesn't feel right, but survival, life, and also happiness, a piece of happiness in there for sure, and then mitigating so much of the treatment that he had to go through. So my late husband, Isamu, at that time was given a prognosis of about 6 months to live. If we do the math there, he wasn't expected to be alive when our child was born. We were able to sustain his life for about 2.5 years, a little under 2.5 years. So he died when our son, who's now 22, was just 19 months old. And that really changed my perception about medicine, seeing what it could do. That was really important, but also seeing where it left a lot of gaps. And ultimately, years later, determining to help fill those gaps for the many people who are sick and not getting better, facing chronic illness. And this is where I started practicing functional medicine nutrition, put myself back through years and years and years of school, and ultimately built a school to teach other providers in my methodologies because they were having so much success. So that's my condensed story. I also have a chronic illness myself. I manage Hashimoto's, and that was its own journey. So I have a real touch point, a personal touch point, and a heartfelt touch point with people experiencing these challenges and often the traumas that are associated with them.
Thank you so much for sharing such personal story. I'm really grateful you're authentic and you feel safe in this space to share with us all how your journey's been. I'm really sorry. I'm really saddened to hear about your husband. In a way, we share this together. We each have one child, one son, and a late husband behind there somewhere. My son is 34, but I'm connected with you in a way in terms of being a single mom to a boy, and doing our best to be there for them. I'm also having an autoimmune disease myself, and it's interesting you mentioned about your own challenge, Hashimoto. My sister struggles with this also, and we come from a traumatic background. We have endured childhood trauma in our family. So here we are, thousands of miles away, coming from different places, from different worlds, and yet having so much in common. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. And so much of our experience is not unique. I mean, there are definitely unique aspects, but I hear so many people who struggle with different variations of trauma and challenge in life that are then dealing with their own health challenges. So there's a lot of evidence that's showing us those connections. But you and I, Nicoletta, that sounds like a lot that we share, and I'm equally sorry for your loss.
Thank you so much. You're very kind. But look at us. We've turned that adversity into an opportunity to get to know ourselves better, to understand a little bit more what happened with the dear people around us, and to learn something new about health an illness, about trauma and post-traumatic growth. I'd like to stay here maybe for a few minutes and talk a little bit about your experience of post-traumatic growth. Prior to this experience of being pregnant and contemplated the thought of losing your husband, has there been any trauma early in life?
Not significant. I mean, I would say that as much as I've now studied and researched and see people who have had adverse childhood experiences, I do feel like I had a fortunate childhood with more adverse adult experiences because of this particular trauma. That said, there is generational trauma. I'm Jewish, and my ancestors have suffered in their ways. And so that too has an impact on the expression of our genes and therefore our disease state. So the connections there are significant. But for me, I think even weathering the trauma that I experienced with my husband's illness and death was something that I had a lot of resilience around comparatively. I was able to go into aspects of the experience with him that were joyful, that were about connection. I was able to put some of the worry of what would happen or could happen away to be in the present, which I'm so grateful for. But the toll that all that took, even the resilience in the face of the trauma, had long-lasting effects, if that makes any sense. Like my ability to soldier through doesn't always result in the most positive physiological or psychological effects.
Of course, indeed, because in a way, what you're doing, you're able to celebrate everything that is still good in this environment, but also acknowledge what is hard, challenging, difficult. But because you are pregnant, expecting a child, and your husband is struggling himself, you need to really provide for both, to the child, to attend the child yourself. So here it is how transgenerational trauma continues in a way, with whatever happens to us being now absorbed by our children, isn't it?
Yes.
Because naturally they will live this even in the utero. So maybe
yes,
we can talk about that a little bit.
I was just going to say, Nicoletta, like I wonder, I'm going to knock on wood. My son seems at this age, healthy, happy, very well grounded. But knowing what I know, I do wonder what was happening while he was in utero and I was under this tremendous amount of stress. And then where things like love and happiness and joy are also a part of the equation. So the way that my late husband, and I were able to come together at that time is also feeding the terrain. So I can't only look at my son Gilbert's time in utero as a traumatic time and the worry that I was in, because there was also this really sacred space that we had moved into that was much more spiritual, much more deeply connected, much more essential. We were down to like the first principles of life and living. And both of those things have an epigenetic effect. So I don't know yet where the trauma that I was going through, that he experienced in utero, will or can manifest. Hopefully, we don't see something major there, but I also have to recognize, wow, it doesn't exist in isolation. And I think that is a place of comfort for many of us, particularly mothers, because we can put a lot of blame on ourselves for whatever our children are experiencing physiologically or behaviorally. And there's way more to, we can't oversimplify how the ancestral or epigenetic factors influence outcomes.
Oh, so true. So true. If it would be so simple, just to reduce everything to our experience, the level of cortisol we have or adrenaline in our bodies as mothers, or how at peace we feel at one moment or another, that would be so simple. but it's much complex than that. So now that you're talking about ancestral trauma and the in utero trauma, can we maybe expand a little bit on this? What has been your learning through your researches and everything you've tried to capture throughout the years, just to make it easier for you to move through a sense of understanding and acceptance and surrendering to what is, and gradually learn some lessons, extract some meaning from your pain, and naturally move through that passage of forgiveness towards healing and inner transformation. So maybe share a little bit with us what's been your learning so far.
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, this is a big topic and ancestry is huge. And I want to always preface my answers with the fact that I'm a clinician. I'm a functional medicine nutritionist. I'm an educator. I'm not a researcher. I love reading. I'm not an ethnographer. I'm not an anthropologist. So there's a lot of different fields of study that come together to understand ancestral trauma and its impact from a research and qualitative research perspective. But what I see in practice and in establishing a trauma-informed practice and also training others to hopefully be trauma-informed in their practice is that we have to understand that trauma refers to a deeply distressing or disturbing experience that lives on in the body, and that could be any kind of experience. So the living on piece is what differentiates the trauma from a stress or a stressor. A stressor we should be able to recover from, whereas when it becomes trauma, it's living within us in some particular way. And then the epigenetic factor, which is what really, really holds a lot of interest for me as well, is where these things within our body, these things that influence the expression of our genes and our cellular phenotypes, those cause factors or mechanisms to change within us that shift the expression of the DNA. So we can't change our DNA. That's where it's a blueprint. So our genetics and our genomics are fixed, but the expression of those genetics and genomics is what we change with epigenetic factors. So it's sort of like the bathing of the genes. I always like to remind people DNA or our genes is like a spiral staircase, right? It's set in stone. We can see that molecule, and then all the factors are what shift and change that. So the mantra for my work is everything is connected. We are all unique and all things matter. And those areas relate to everything is connected is the field of study of omics. We are all unique is related to precision medicine practices, and all things matter is related to epigenetics. So lunch matters, your ancestry matters, your sleep matters. It's understanding that it's a whole bath or bathing of all these factors that influence turn on or off genes, turn them up, turn them down. This is why when I talk about this subject, people will ask me, like, do you like genetic testing? And I'm like, it's fine, but it's just wallpaper. It doesn't tell us what's expressed. It just tells us what's potential, what's possible. And I'd rather focus on the reality of how we're feeling, what we're experiencing, and then what we're doing or what we're able to do for each of us based on that whole picture. Everything is connected. We are all unique. All things matter. So for me, that ancestral piece, which is related to the epigenetics and the precision medicine practices, recognizes that you come with a story. In functional medicine, we call this the ATMs, the antecedents, the triggers, and the mediators. And my love of epigenetics has led me to study narrative medicine, which is a newer field that really helps us to understand the anecdotal pieces of a person's story that relate to their physiological health outcomes. How do I see who you are, Nicoletta, not as your diagnoses or your signs and symptoms alone, but as the person whose history, whose parents' history, whose life journey led you to this place? That gives me a much broader picture. So I hope that's answering your question, but from my perspective, the ancestral piece isn't my area of study other than I have to hold space for it. And that's how I hold space for myself and can recognize the post-traumatic growth, which is essentially taking a difficult experience and being able to transform that into something positive. And I can't force that. It has to come from sitting in the grief state, feeling the grief, recognizing the grief, being able to put voice to the grief as I recognize what is next, what my body needs, what my mind needs. And that's what allows for that next state of growth. So that was a big answer to a big question. Please let me know if I can dive into any of those factors any further.
I'm sensing that you're talking about an acknowledgement that we carry this with us. It's not just what's happening right now or what just happened to us earlier in terms of our lived trauma, like it happened to us as individuals in our family setting. So you're holding space for this acknowledgement that there is much more to our lives, to our pain, to what we carry within, than this experience, this event, and the imprint of that event that was left inside of us. That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can put voice to it when we think back about how our parents may have expressed themselves and where that comes from. A lot of forgiveness comes when we realize the roots that may have brought to life certain behaviors of ways of acting or ways of protection or protecting oneself. Like this starts to tell a different story, and we hold space for suffering, not our own, but for those who came before us in a different way that allows us to see ourselves more broadly as well.
Absolutely. I love your holistic perspective to life. And I wonder, how do you work? Now, you've been through some trauma yourself as an adult, as a mother, expecting mother. You managed to fight for all three of you, for this beautiful triangle that is created in your family space. And you have your husband there to welcome your son. And then you have to part ways from this physical world, in this physical field. And then work obviously on being a mother, being a woman, being yourself, but also going through the grief, maybe adjusting a little bit to the absence of the husband and the father, the partner, the lover. And then you discover obviously ways of looking into health and well-being from a different perspective. And you delve a little bit into this functional medicine nutrition, I would say. What is it really? How do you describe it? And how did you actually manage to train in this and develop your own school in time? If you can share a bit more about this.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So for me, it really did start during that time of witnessing Isamu's illness and the way he was treated in the system. So that was our first time in the system, right? We hadn't really been in the medical system. Yeah. Maybe we had gone to the doctor for like a sinus infection or a broken limb, but there was never a point where they had such access and we were so reliant on them. And as I was in that system and thankful for some aspects of it and frustrated with other aspects, I really began to see that the person was missing from the equation. Because to me, Isamu was my beloved. He was the love of my life. He was my husband and a father to be and a son and a brother and a friend and a software developer and a musician. He was all these things. But when we entered this system, he was merely his diagnosis. And that was surprising to me. I hadn't ever experienced that. And the idea of just handing himself over to that system without looking at all the times between our medical appointments was too much for me to bear. I needed a little bit more influence. I think I would have called it control then.
Yes.
I think of it as influence now, but there were many points where I felt like, wait a minute, we have more opportunity to influence the outcomes. There's a lot of time, even if it's a month in a situation like that. You know, some of us might go a year or 6 months between our medical visits. That's a lot of time, a
Yeah.
lot of days, a lot of hours, a lot of minutes. And I started to realize that there was more that we could do to influence outcomes with the decisions we were making, with the way we were living our lives, and that inside the system, which we were relying on in certain ways, then he could just be that diagnosis. We weren't going to change that. But outside of the walls of that system, we could look at it more broadly. And for me, that's when I turned to what we could do with nutrition and our lifestyle. So how could we think about this differently? So Isamu was he wanted the evidence, he wanted the research, and he was doing his research into which medical treatments to do. And meanwhile, I was researching, wait a minute, what's the connection between refined sugar or sugar in the bloodstream and cancer growth or tumor growth, right? Like, what's that connection I was doing? And at that time, there wasn't as much as there is now. And there's a lot of noise around nutrition now. It was actually hard to find the information. And then I was making decisions that I would pass to him to decide upon, or I was making suggestions, recommendations. Here's a connection between sugar in the bloodstream and cell growth, which the fastest growing cells in your body are tumor cells. So what do you think? And he would say, you know, it was so grave. It wasn't like, oh, I have pain in my knee and should I eat sugar or not eat sugar? Like, it was life and death. So he would
Yes.
say, remove sugar completely. But then I knew he had a real sweet tooth. So I was like, okay, we can do this differently. We don't have to remove all sweets and pleasure and joy. Let me find ways to make treats that don't raise the blood sugar as much and therefore aren't contributing to that sugar in your bloodstream. And we found a whole new way, and it was fun, and we didn't feel deprived. It felt really playful. We had ways that we were, you know, I was always loving to cook, but we spent time together while I was cooking. He would read me Harry Potter books. Then while we were eating, and then he had to take like copious amounts of pills for the protocols he was on, I would read to him because it would take a long time to swallow. We carved out this space that I'm illustrating wasn't just about the food, but was about lifestyle. We were going to yoga together. We were spending this time that was really, like I said, sacred, that opened my eyes to how you start to fill some of the gaps that exist in our healthcare model, where we don't have to just hand ourselves over. It took me years after that to realize this was my calling. This was something I had to do, to put myself back through years of school, because my undergraduate degree was in a bachelor's of fine arts, and I was working in book publishing as a production director. I had a great career. I worked from home, which was great as a single parent. And yet, it was missing some fulfilling element to me that was calling me. And so I made a huge leap, put myself back through school, some of it while working and being a single parent, then taking a bigger leap when I was ready, and then starting to do the work through education and seeing how it landed for people. And I didn't know that what I was doing was all that different than what any nutrition professional would do. I was just bringing my perspective and my awareness of the gaps and the person into the work, and then realized I was having results that others weren't having. And with the help of like a business coach at the time, I was able to see like, wait, I'm doing something different than others, and maybe I can mentor or teach that. So what I first developed as what I thought would be like a small mentorship was a big class, and that grew, and that following grew. And I've now trained nearly 8,000 practitioners in over 68 countries in the methodologies that also for me have evolved over the last 12 years of delivering them to practitioners, so that they're more systems based, so that we can apply them to any type of case. And that's been a huge state of post-traumatic growth for me. Isamu lives in my work and in my mission to carry this forward. And it really serves my grief, as well as hopefully touching others' grief and ability to put that into service.
It's fantastic the way you talk about your journey. The ability to actually bring your own perspective and hold on to that and cherish that and allow it to grow and blossom into something amazing that would become your calling is just something that I would say maybe just few people would dare to embark on. So it's a very beautiful story. Thank you so much. Can we then understand a little bit more about your own perspective? Where was it 12 years ago when you started? And where are you now in your understanding of functional nutrition?
Yeah. So I want to go back and just say to your comment and reflection that one of the things that I used to find myself saying to myself after Isamu died was, I don't know what to do because he brought out the best in me. I was my best self with him. And it was not long until I realized, wait a minute, if he brought out the best in me and I was my best self with him, that self is me. And so how can I pay honor to the self that I felt with him, even without him, in his honor and for myself? And so taking that one thing I used to say to myself, which had a negative tinge to him, I don't know what to do because I was my best self with him, and saying my best self is me. How can I carry that forward? How can I be that? Was a real shift for me, a reframe. And then in terms of the actual practice of functional nutrition, I should probably back it up and say what functional nutrition is, what functional medicine nutrition is. And it's very much aligned with functional medicine practices. Functional medicine was established in the 1990s and very much based on three primary tenets: the therapeutic partnership, which we're talking about a little bit, recognizing there's always two experts in the room. I can be expert in my field of study, but if I'm working with you, you are the expert in you. And my job is to bring your expertise into that therapeutic relationship. That we are looking for the roots, which means we're asking, why is this happening? Not just what do I do about it? And that we're embracing systems. And that goes in two ways for me. One is systems biology. Everything is connected. Again, part of that mantra. The gut's connected to the brain. The hormones are connected to the liver, which is connected to the gut. Our emotions are going to be connected to that trauma and what we hold in our body. So our reactions aren't just existing in a vacuum. So systems biology, but also a systems-based approach. And this is where I embrace what I call, or what are called, mental models or system thinking, where we're looking through a way that allows us to solve into any problem with a system, a systematic way of thinking, as opposed to a protocol. The difference then between functional medicine and functional nutrition is the tools in our toolbox. So while a functional medicine practitioner may acknowledge the importance of diet and lifestyle modification, as functional nutrition counselors, as those that I train, we're anchoring on those things. We're saying, yes, you're doing these medical things, and dietary changes are not a handout. You are a person who has a history and experience with your body, with food, with ancestral foods, with your culture. And we're bringing that all into the picture so that we're not making changes at a rate that that really ignore the realities of our relationship with our body, and that a lot of people are dieting these days. And I'm not looking for people to go on a diet. I'm looking for people to make a lifestyle change that honors their body and embraces body positivity, while acknowledging that we might need to make some changes at a pace that makes sense for you and your body. So that's what functional nutrition is. And a lot of people ask, what's the difference between nutrition and functional nutrition? Nutrition science is about what exists outside the body. Is that broccoli good or bad? That red wine good or bad? That coffee good or bad? And what we're looking at, ideally, I know what I'm looking at, is how does that substance interact within your body? So if I just use the example of coffee, my body genetically, digestively, from an inflammatory lens, like I can handle coffee and caffeine. I'm good. Like physiologically, I'm good. That's not true for everybody. We could have different physiological reactions, maybe not process the caffeine, maybe it causes disruption in our upper or lower digestion. However, I do notice that when I drink coffee, I can be a little bit more intense. And I'm an intense person with a lot to say and a lot of drive. And I notice that in certain situations, that's not always welcome. And so I have to have the awareness and that self-reflection that when I'm drinking coffee, it may be harder for people to receive my message. I don't mean my audience, I mean more my team who are closer in because of my intensity. It amps up that intensity just a little bit more. And so that awareness is what I'm trying to help people cultivate. In functional medicine, we call this our mediators, right? These are our, when I talked about our story or our personal history, we are all unique. Our antecedents, our triggers, our mediators. Our mediators are the things that make us feel better or make us feel worse. And I know I might feel worse if I feel like people are recoiling from me. So maybe that cup of coffee isn't the best thing for me on days where I have a lot of interaction with my team. That little awareness is what makes it functional inside me, reaction versus outside me. This is what we have to say about the food, which is a lot of the noise. What's changed for me over the years in my teaching is that depth of physiological understanding and putting it into systems thinking. I have 3 systems that are major to what I'm teaching, and also more of the trauma-informed, culturally competent perspective, so that I'm bringing issues of accessibility, diversity, inclusivity into the work so that this work can meet the needs of any individual and not bypass their truth and their reality for whatever reason might exist. And a lot of people have trauma within the medical system, and our awareness of that is what's really shifted for me in my teaching, so that we're not trying to fix people, but we're being with them in the process of their healing journey.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's so beautiful how well you articulate all of this. It's so clear for me now. I must have been a little bit confused myself, but I thank you so much for making these clarifications, for bringing them here between functional medicine and functional nutrition, but also between nutrition and functional nutrition. It's so beautiful how you added to the nutrition and the functional nutrition, to the classic or standard practice, your own twist to it, adding the personal history and just considering the wholeness of the person, I would say, not just a standard physical body that will respond to or would react to any kind of intake or any kind of stimuli in a particular way, but allowing for that nuance, for that specialness, for that particularity of everyone and everything. So that's really beautiful. And I think how you describe your practice and your training, it's more an invitation to a sense of openness to experience, openness to accept that there could be some variables that we haven't considered yet, but we're still open to discover a bit more. It's an invitation to self-discovery in a way, starting from this perspective of our physiology or of our bodily functions. So I absolutely loved it. And then how you bring in the component of awareness, of being mindful and being, here and now, present, aware of what you're doing with yourself, how you're engaging with this physical world around you, and how you're taking care of this physical space that you use for your life. That's absolutely really lovely. I would like to maybe expand a little bit more on the training that you're offering. You mentioned at some point that this is functional nutrition counseling. So the counselors, obviously, they are not psychotherapists, psychological counselors, but they will understand a little bit more about the wholeness of the person. So would you consider looking into the mental space as well and the spirituality, holding space for some emotionality at some point and healing the person in their wholeness? Is this what you mean by training your counselors?
Yes, yes. So the training full body systems is for anybody who's seeing gaps or experiencing gaps in healthcare and wants to go help others. And there's a wide array of people who come through the program. So they might be psychotherapists. We have a lot of mental health counselors and addiction counselors and people working in different situations with different licenses and lack of licenses in the mental health space. And for me, it really is that next step of addition over to what anybody is doing. So it's taking the methodology and applying it in your area of interest. So we might have doctors in the course, we might have nutritionists, dietitians, a lot of nurses who recognize that they weren't getting to do patient-centered care like they hoped when they went into training. My nurses often tell me that they think my training should be in all nutrition, all nursing programs, because this is that way of thinking differently. There's acupuncturists and massage therapists and physiotherapists and, people who are working at all different lenses, as well as health coaches, life coaches, nutrition coaches, and people who come from no healthcare background, have no license, but maybe they've experienced the gaps in healthcare. They've had children, let's say, on the spectrum, and they've worked with them and people have asked them about it, and then they want to go and help other people. So what we do with the training, each and every one of us, is different. It's a way for me of deploying the force of the thinking versus the specific licensure, because it's not a license, of what you will do with it. So it's not a dictated path. And what a doctor can do with functional nutrition is going to be different than what a dietitian can do with functional nutrition training, which is going to be different than what that mom who helped their child is going to do. And that's because of scope, because of location, because of different boundaries that each will have. The doctor might not have time that the mom has, whereas the doctor can order labs and the mom can't, right? So to me, it's not about a direct path. It's about a next level of how we rethink and reframe our awareness of health. And the models include areas that are speaking to what you're speaking about. So that mind, spirit, emotions community is a part of my matrix. Stress and resilience, relationships and networks. Triggers could be emotional triggers. They could be familial triggers. So the matrix itself as a model is a place for us to capture what we see and learn from the individual from our lens or scope of practice, right? So you may see things using the matrix that I wouldn't see because of your area of expertise. And that's what I want the tools to work for. I want it to work for you in practice. It doesn't need to work for you and me the same way. And what I realized in practice myself is that, like, I can't help everybody. I can't save the world. I can't work with the Lyme population and the cancer population and breast cancer and prostate cancer and brain cancer and Hashimoto's. But other people care about diabetes and obesity and heart disease and autism and neurodegeneration. And they're going to take these systems and go out there and do their work fueled by a way of thinking versus this is what that means specifically, and we all do the same work. So the training, it's a 10-month training in the science and art of functional nutrition. We go through the physiological systems and understand where diet and lifestyle modification influence that internal terrain, and we bring that into our care. That's the goal. It's not a protocol. It's not an X for Y. So to me, that's really where the beauty of the community also comes in, because people are coming from all different backgrounds, all different places. We have Ayurvedic practitioners and we have Chinese medicine practitioners, and we're all coming together and saying, like, wait a minute, something's missing. There are gaps. How do I think differently into each and every person or case that I'm supporting?
It all sounds so interesting. I'm actually going to leave the door open for myself to revisit it at some point, honestly.
Yeah.
Well done for everything. It's just absolutely, it's amazing. I admire you. And I really admire you, and I celebrate with you your success and everything you've achieved so far. Let's bring it now towards the end into the area of happiness. What are your best 3 teachings to live a happy and fulfilling life?
Yeah, I'm going to bring us back to one of my other systems, right? So I have a system called the 3 tiers to nutrition mastery. Personally, I think of it as the 3 tiers to epigenetic mastery, but nutrition is usually a more accessible term. And those 3 tiers are non-negotiables, deficiency to sufficiency, and dismantling the dysfunction. Oftentimes we're sitting in tier 3, and I'm going to invite us to come into tier 1 and tier 2. So for happiness, I can talk physiologically about what some of the non-negotiables are, but we all know our non-negotiables. I need alone time every day. I need space for my brain to think and create. I need time in nature. I need to get to bed early by a certain time. Like, when I know my non-negotiables, again, bringing us back to that self-awareness and those mediators, I am a happier person. And so recognizing these are my non-negotiables, and I can't tell everybody what they will be for them, but I invite each and every person listening to think about, what are the non-negotiables for me? It might be reading every day, or I love listening to podcasts and stories. I have to be stimulated in some intellectual way. All of that becomes part of what allows for the happiness to come through, because we've honored who we are. Similarly, that tier 2, deficiency to sufficiency, the other side of that might be toxicity. If we think of a spectrum, sure, from a functional medicine lens, I can think about that as like vitamin D or B vitamins or whatever might be nutrient missing or physiologically missing. But again, is there joy that's deficient in my life? Is there love that's deficient in my life? And are there ways that I can cultivate, make that an intention, instead of seeking like this big like unattainable, like, I wish I was happier? Is there a different way in that says, you know what, I need more physical touch in my life? How am I going to ask my friends and family for more hugs, right? Like, how do we bring it down to something more elemental? This is first principles thinking. What's at the base that ultimately helps me achieve that thing that I'm after? So bringing us back to that system, non-negotiables, know your non-negotiables, deficiencies, recognize where you're not getting what you need, or you're getting too much of what you need. And finding that happy medium allows for our innate happiness to come through.
And the third one?
Dismantling dysfunction to me is one where I say, when we focus on 1 and 2, we actually do number 3.
Okay.
Oftentimes with that third one, we're trying to focus there. I don't feel happy. Give me some medication.
I see.
Right? We're trying to dismantle the problem at the knees instead of saying, wait a minute, this actually exists in an environment and I am doing tier 3 when I do tier 1 and tier 2.
What a beautiful way to conceptualize your life studying and work. It sounds really, really well designed. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. Thank you for your time. It's been an amazing interview. I'm hoping that we're going to keep in touch and maybe expand a bit more on this. Where can people find out more about you and your training and the beautiful work that you're doing?
Thank you for those lovely reflections and for having this conversation with me. It's been so just truly lovely. And if you head over to andreanakayama.com or Andrea Nakayama and all the web sources, that will lead you back to all the different things, lead you to the training, lead you to my current writing and anything I'm doing that's outside of the program. So everything can be found at andreanakayama.com.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for your time, for your wisdom, for everything you shared. All the best.
Thank you.